Informative Classification Lesson 5. Today we are going to understand the importance of engaging the reader. We're going to write an engaging introduction. We're going to understand the strategies used to write a conclusion, and then we are going to write our conclusion. And lastly, we are going to add linking sentences to the end of our body paragraphs. When we look at the genre chart for classification, it says to have a proper classification essay, you have to engage the reader and establish a clear thesis. We already have our clear thesis, so we're going to look at engaging the reader. Where would that be in the 6 traits of writing? It's going to be an organization because our engaging strategy begins our papers. We do not want our readers to look like this, and so to ensure that they don't look like that, we are going to use an engaging strategy that is at the very beginning of our paragraph and grabs our readers' attention and keeps them reading so that they look engaged like this. What your introduction needs is a hook, important background information, and a thesis. We already have our thesis, so we're going to add our hook, which is an engaging strategy. You should have received a red paper in class that had a bunch of different types of engaging strategies. I'll just talk about a couple here. There are 2 things that your engaging strategy has to do, and that is introduce the topic and engage your reader. The topic for you guys would be the giver. In my case, it's gathering blue. The first one that I have here is an action strategy. This is where I engage the reader with something being done or performed. Kira fights for her life daily in a community that wants to throw her to the beast. Kira is doing the action of fighting, and I introduced my topic and engaged the reader. Full points. Next, we have an anecdote strategy. This is where you tell a short story that is focused on a single event that is used to prove a point. I chose to use the short story of Kira, and I said, a girl can weave reality into existence with her hands and thread. Despite this talent, her society wishes to throw her away simply because she has a lame leg. The next one we have is a fact strategy. This is where you engage the reader with a fascinating fact about the topic. So I said Kira was almost killed at birth, but she grew to have a talent that no one could ignore. A list strategy is where you use 3 descriptive words to introduce your topic. Do not just put the descriptive words, make sure that you then explain what they do. So I did hard work, resilience, death, no imperfections. These are just a few of the words that describes Kira's community in Gathering Blue. And then we have onomatopoeia, engages the reader with a sound effect. Again, don't just do the sound effect, explain what it is. So I did thump, scrape, thump, scrape. These are the sounds Kira hears constantly as she pulls her twisted leg around her community. Lastly, we have description. This is where you use an interesting conversation between 2 or more characters. And I have still, they made me promise that you would not become a burden, Mother said. I haven't, had I? Kira asked. All of these engaging strategies that I showed introduce the topic and engage the reader and would get you full points. You are going to now add your hook. I felt like my anecdote hook was the best, engaged the reader the best, so I put it first. It is now your turn to add your engaging strategy. If you want extra credit, you need to have 2. If you want to get an A and full points, your engaging strategy, you just need to have 1 that introduces the topic, which is the giver, and engages the reader. Push pause and come back when you are done. Next, we are going to add important background information. This is information that your reader needs to understand about the giver to understand the pros and cons in your thesis statement. For example, my reader would not understand what was going on if I didn't explain that Kira had a twisted leg, that she had a physical disability, and that she had an amazing threading talent where she could thread new realities into existence, and that her community had really severe expectations and rules, and that you would get thrown out of the community if you didn't follow those rules. Without any of this information, my readers could not understand my thesis. So that's what you are doing right now, is adding important background information that your reader needs to understand about the giver in order to understand your pros and your cons. Here's my example of important background information. Gathering Blue by Lois Lowry follows a young orphaned girl who has a twisted leg and a magical weaving ability that can create new realities with her thread. Her community has several rules and expectations that cannot be broken, or you are thrown to the beasts in the surrounding land. I gave all of that important background information to my reader so that they can understand my thesis. You are now doing that. Push pause, come back when you are done. Next up on our objectives is to add a conclusion to our classification essay that summarizes all of the main points. Conclusion would also go in organization because it appears at the end of our paper and it wraps everything up for us and for our reader. It's the end. Your conclusion has to have three things. You need to restate your thesis, summarize the main points of your thesis, and then add a concluding statement. My restated thesis was there are many pros and cons in Kira's Village. I didn't add the specifics to that right here because I'm going to add that right here in summary of main points. It is now your turn. You are going to restate your thesis, push pause, and come back when you're done. Next, we are going to look at summary of the main points. This is where you're going to go more in depth about what pros and cons you talked about in your thesis. And I said they use fear to drive the inhabitants to create, and they kill those who are not physically able to add to the community. This was the pro, this was the con. I summarized my main points that came from my thesis. It's now your turn to do that. Push pause and come back to the video when you are done. Next up, you need a concluding statement that fully ends your paragraph. You should have this on the back side of that red paper that I gave you in class, and these are all of the examples of concluding strategies that you can use to end your paper. You can have an open strategy where you close with a statement that allows the reader to draw their own conclusion. So I said, in Kira's Village, threads of advantage and adversity are woven together, leaving the reader to decide whether the society's merit outweighs its flaws or vice versa. I mentioned pros and I mentioned cons, and I wrapped everything together, letting my reader decide. Here, I have a question strategy where you close with a question that involves the reader. What do the pros and cons of Kira's Village reveal about your own society? A quote strategy. This is where you just take a good quote from the book that talks about your topic. And so I put, there are no beggars in the village. The people of the village work hard and they were accustomed to taking care of their own. And make sure you quote which page you got it from if you are going to end with a quote. You can push pause here and write your concluding strategy on your own paper. Make sure that you include your topic, which is the pros and cons of Jonas's community, and you wrap it all up for your reader. Push pause and come back when you are done. This is what my concluding statement looks like. I went with the question one that involved the reader. I felt like that was the best that mentioned my topic and wrapped everything up. To make sure that you get full points on this, you need to make sure that you summarize the main points. That will get you a 3, but if you want extra credit, you need to summarize them in a different way than you did in your paper. Next, we're going to talk about transitions and varying sentences. We're going to just talk about transitions right now, specifically at the end of your body paragraph. So we had really good evidence and analyzed that evidence. Now, however, we have to link our pro paragraph to our con paragraph. You're going to do that by restating the main topics that were in your pro and then lead in to different cons that you're going to talk about. This is what mine looked like. Despite these amazing benefits of working hard, there are also some large cons to Kira's community. I talked about the pros and led into the con. It is your turn to add your linking statement. Make sure that you wrap up the main ideas of the pros and lead into the cons. Push pause and come back when you're done. Next, we are going to look at the linking sentence that comes at the end of your con paragraph and leads into your conclusion. Mine is losing the valuable skills of the people who were killed seems like more of a damage to the community than a gain. I had to make sure that I talked about pros in some way because that's what our conclusion talks about, right? Is pros and cons. Use my reference as an example if you would like. Remember, you just need to wrap up your main idea of the cons and lead into the conclusion, which talks about pros and cons. Push pause and come back when you are done. All right, we had all 5 of these objectives today. Hopefully, you wrote an engaging introduction and you wrote your conclusion and your linking sentences at the bottom of your body paragraphs. As always, if you have any questions, please reach out.